This is our 50th episode.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Oh my gosh, I completely
congratulations.
forgot. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Happy Pride, bitches. Let's cry about our trauma.
That's the
Oh
club.
dear.
We're in the club, the gay club.
This is
The
a
gay
place,
club, TM.
the universal gay club where we come to cry about our problems and
Yeah. Judy Garland created it, and then we
Mhm.
all come here.
Yep,
It's a liminal space somewhere over the rainbow.
Yeah. Oh, look, is that
exactly.
the first brick thrown at Stonewall behind you on the
Yeah.
back there?
That's like a special table. You have to pay extra to get that. It's like a corner booth, and they have the brick from Stonewall. Yeah, it's sponsored by
Oh.
the Target Pride Collection. People were unhappy about that sponsorship.
uh
Welcome back to Not My Fantasy, the show where we talk about fantasy films and the lore that inspired them. I'm Cullen.
and I'm Hannah.
And we're here with fellow fantasy film podcasters of Once Upon a VHS, Michael and Callum.
Hello. Thank
Hello.
you so much for having us on. We've been mentioned just before we started recording, we are long time Not My Fantasy fans and also former Glee booties. So hello.
I'm
It
touched.
goes way
I
back.
love that. Yeah.
It is it's touching because you're like, okay, so people do listen to this and it does
Yeah.
affect them. Yeah. So thank you.
Oh,
And thank you for being our first international guests.
our pleasure. Feel
This
honored.
is exciting.
Yeah, from the sunny Scotland today.
Proving that the UK is a real place. I know we weren't quite
Yes,
sure.
we were not sure, and I guess you guys have kind of confirmed it. So.
Yeah, but the UK, not my fantasy.
Not my fantasy.
No, thank you. Yeah. We're here for it's Pride Month. I'm wearing the Pride shirt that I bought at the American Eagle on the US-Mexico border. Just to let everyone know, there is an American Eagle right at the border. So whenever you see news stations showing like a hellscape, maybe just remember that you can get discount jeans at the border.
All the essentials, you know.
All the essentials. But yeah, we're here in the club and to talk about the 2023 film All of Us Strangers. It's just hard to find any queer, gay, lesbian, anything fantasy films that were like fantasy, not camp, not, it was it exists in some TV, like the Willow series they deleted from Disney Plus.
Oh, I didn't know they pulled it from Disney Plus.
Yeah.
It was very shortly after it was released as well.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, there's like a lesbian kiss in the corner of Star Wars. No, but there's like more like queer representation in television in general, and so in more fantasy series. But it was harder than I even imagined to find some movies to fit for 1 month.
I think we did the same Google search 3 times on one of our a couple of our meetings, and we're still like, yep, there's nothing. Like we're
They
really
still haven't
digging.
made one.
They still haven't made one in the past 3 weeks. Yeah. So I
It
mean
was
that
like,
just
does
goes to show.
Stardust count? Like corner of
Yeah.
we're like, is Uma Thurman as president and red, white, and royal blue? Is that fantastical enough?
Yeah, we'll take what we can get, you know.
Yeah.
I guess if they're like, there's already fairies, we don't need any more in our fantasy world.
Queer magic just exuding from our pores. That's all we need.
I mean, it does make me think like who do they think is watching these films about fairies and unicorns and shit, and mermaids, little girls, and gay men?
Yeah, yeah. Who's pulling up to that Little Mermaid remake to cry when Ariel's sad?
Yeah, exactly.
But so we found this movie, All of Us Strangers, which I had heard of, but this was my first time watching. Now, had anyone else seen this movie before?
No.
So
We had.
we went to see this at the cinema when it was released. There was so much buzz about it, and everybody was talking about other performances, and a lot of our queer friends were going and saying how much they cried at the cinema. So we went in prepared, but I'm infamously like I very rarely cry at any movie, with like bizarre exceptions, like Pete's Dragon. For some reason, the Pete's Dragon remake, I hasten to add, not the original.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I was kind of going in prepared, but I'm really glad that we got to rewatch this one, and also to rewatch it in the context of the novel, and kind of understanding the original and sort of seeing it from a different perspective, because it really gave me a different perspective on this movie.
Yeah, I definitely heard of it because I remember everyone was just like, "Oh my God, Paul Mescal, Paul Mescal." I was like, "Who is
Yeah.
this?" And then I remember Googling him, seeing this movie and then another movie, and I was like, "Okay, cool. Like, I'll get around to it." Then I just didn't get around to it until now. So yeah, this is and again, I mean, should we kind of preface like again, it's like loosely fantasy, like we're still trying to figure
Yeah.
out the definition of that, which
But according
watching
to
it,
the internet, it was
according to the
fantasy.
internet, yeah, I think even on IMDb it says like it's fantasy. But yeah, so like I think watching it in the context of like thinking about it in terms of being a fantasy film was also really interesting. So
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to go by that metric of if it's tagged as fantasy on IMDb,
yeah,
works for me.
right.
Yeah, very much
Yeah.
down to interpretation. But yeah, I guess the source is very much fantasy.
Yeah. The source
Or
is horror
yeah,
fantasy,
Mm.
so it's connected. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I was just even thinking that even when they do like queer Hallmark Christmas movies, Santa Claus isn't even shipping them. Is the implication that Santa is homophobic?
Well,
Do you
now
know
that's the question.
I think he would be, to be honest.
he's
Well,
from a
especially with
different
the one from
era.
Rudolph.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh.
And let's
Yeah.
not even get the heat miser and the cold miser involved, because they're not the queer representation that we want.
No, no. Yeah, so for this, I watched or I listened to the novel, the 1987 novel Strangers by Teiichi Yamada, that the book or the movie is based on the book. So it's a short read, and I would really recommend it because, like, on paper, if you're like, okay, it's a book about a like depressed, recently divorced, middle-aged man, I'd be like, yes. But I like was like, oh, this is good. Like, I was very interested. And the movie that inspired was written and directed by Andrew High. He famous for the HBO series Looking with Groff Sauce, Jonathan
Oh.
Groff.
Yes, love Jonathan Groff. So sexy, so erotic. We love him.
We love him. And this was the second adaptation of the novel. There's the Discontents or the you said you watched it, right, Callum and Michael?
Yes, yeah, it's the Discarnate. So that is a 1988 film,
Yes.
and it's directed by Nobuhiko Bayashi, who also directed a film called House or Houseu, which is fantasy horror, bizarro, absolutely a must watch.
Incredible
Really
work of art.
highly recommend the director's previous film. So yeah, again, this is the director of the Discarnates, which was the first adaptation of the novel. Some interesting little flourishes in the Discarnates as well, but apparently it's a very faithful adaptation of the book.
Yes, and this movie is pretty different. It moves it to a different imperial island, the UK, and it stars Andrew Scott, who has been in so many things. For movies, I'm like, okay, which ones would connect? Like Alice Through the Looking Glass. He was also in the movie Handsome Devil, which we've talked about before when we talked about how many times Nicholas Galitzine has been gay in a movie.
Yes.
Uh,
Takes it off the list. Nearly as many as Darren Criss. Like,
Nearly
Yeah.
as many. Yeah. Probably more, right? Is Darren Criss just Glee in the one where he's the murdering Versace?
I guess so. It feels like more.
It feels
Yeah.
like more.
Right.
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, there was the culturally queer comment, which I haven't even. There's some things I'm like, I don't want to touch it. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to know why. I don't care. I
Yep.
truly don't. It stars Paul Mescal, famous also for Normal People on HBO. BuzzFeed or somebody, a lot of people were talking about his dick. And that was another thing where I was like, I don't really have time for this.
There was the dick, but there was also the chain. Do you remember how much of a thing maybe that was just in the UK?
I think that might be a British
chain
thing, you know, the Connell's chain stuff, even though it's an Irish production.
Yeah, but yeah, there was, so in Normal People, Paul Mescal's character wears this like gold chain around his neck, and it was very much the must-have item for a hot 3 weeks. After it first aired.
It was during lockdown, though. I don't know if we'd all just sort of collectively lost our minds at that point.
Maybe.
And this incredibly average-looking Irish man became everyone's
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah,
thing.
that sounds like lockdown. Like Jamie Bell, who played the Thing in Fantastic Four, is in this movie, famously. And Claire Foy, Queen Elizabeth herself.
Yeah.
Sorry to Olivia Colman, but I didn't keep up with the show shortly after.
Sorry.
Claire Foy was definitely the best interpretation of QE2, I would say.
Yeah, and I think the older Queen Elizabeth as a character gets, like the more it becomes like connected to our modern understanding of history, and it just becomes harder to root for her.
Yeah.
There is that. I would argue that the quality of the show itself went off a cliff.
We stuck with that show till the bitter end, until Princess Diana's ghost turned up. And
then you're like, I'm out.
I don't know about this one.
You're like, I don't know, when will we do the Kate Middleton season, or where she's lost, you know? This had a box office of 20.1 million, released first in August 2023 at the Telluride Festival, and then in January 2024, it was released in the UK. Reviews were strong. It was an indie darling, winning several British Independent Film Awards and several other awards, but it received, as of yet, no Teen Choice Award nominations.
That's such a bummer.
Yeah, it's hard when like groundbreaking films don't get nominated by Who Really Matters.
Exactly, the teens.
The teens.
Andrew Scott is just crying out to get up there and get gunned. So I see this is how out of touch I am. I'm like, Teen Choice Award.
He wants that surfboard so bad.
Now, I don't even know who votes in the Teen Choice Awards. Can you just be like, I'm a teen and I voted?
Teens, presumably.
Guess, yeah.
Are you saying, are you insinuating there's voter fraud for the Teen Choice Awards?
Well, I mean,
wow.
Like, would you have to verify your birth, but it's not like you have like a license because you're a teen. You can
might have like an ID.
Like a school ID?
Well, no, just like a state ID, or if you have your permit, or you might have your license at 16 and
13?
Up. You know?
So it's only older
I was
teens.
Thinking, I don't know. I mean,
yeah, are the Teen Choice Awards
teens ages? Sound off in the comments.
Let us know, all the teens watching.
What is your choice?
What is your choice?
Be? Yeah.
So there is some lore that's related to the novel, and I did a quick little summary of some queer mythology and fairy tale research I did. I ended up down a bit of a rabbit hole that I had to like pull myself out of, but I do want to touch on it because it's very interesting. So queer people have always existed. Plot twist, I know.
Whoa!
Shakespeare wasn't the first.
I thought he was. Oh my god.
Yeah, grandfather gay, not the first. There are different gay gods, gay deities.
Deities.
There's deities. Zachpali, an Olmec god of flowers, drugs, homosexuality. He lives at this club.
Yep. He owns it.
He owns it, yeah. And so it's like hard to tell, like anything with like ancient Mesoamerica, there's so much like his civilization was conquered by the Aztecs, and so the Aztecs kind of shit on him, and then Christian Spanish colonizers come in and they're shitting on the people who are shitting on him. It's like a, but he liked to have a good time. And very famously, right, there's Apollo. I think I've called him the divine twink.
That's him. He
God
loves
of
the sun. He loves a little bit of music, strumming on his lyre.
Yeah, he's playing Wonderwall at a party. He's playing Chapel Roan at a party. Sorry.
Artemis is a feminine nomenon, so
she is. So Artemis I put on here too, because it's like sometimes you can't always put labels that we have for sexuality on these ancient deities because they just had a different spectrum. So if you talk about like the virgin goddesses, like Athena is very much seen as like not interested in any kind of companionship, and Hestia is like a virgin and like she's so desexualized. But Artemis was hanging around with all these nymphs in their like no men, no boys allowed thing. And there's even the story of Zeus and Callisto, where Zeus seduces and or assaults the nymph Callisto by disguising himself as Artemis. So she lets her close because it's her gal pal. So Zeus is not allowed in this club.
No.
They have special tech to check.
The bouncers know.
Yeah. But Apollo, her brother, he had many a male lover. We talked about Hercules having male lovers too in our Hercules episode. But he had the most famous one is probably Hyacinth. He died because the west wind Zephyr was jealous and hit him with a frisbee or a discus when he was playing with Apollo, and he died. And they turned him into a flower.
It's like that vine when you throw the frisbee. What the fuck, Richard?
Yes. And he eventually, though, he became a god. And he had a whole festival in Sparta, in their area, the manly men, called Hyacinthia. That involved like a boys' chorus. And the people who celebrated that, there are times where they would like be like, sorry, we can't finish this war right now. We have to go back to celebrate Hyacinthia.
Valid.
And then Hyacinth also lending his name to gay icon Hyacinth Bouquet of British television infamy.
That's too British of a reference.
I was like, I'm nodding, like, yes, totally.
I did pick it as my favorite flower when I was a kid.
That was the sign. There
yeah,
you go.
Yeah, because the Bible camp theme of May was flowers. So, there's Admetus, who is served by Apollo, and then later, like Apollo had to serve him, but then Apollo kind of guided him and helped him win his wife, and all this, classic GBF. Very challengers coded, and.
Would love to see next project for Luca. Get on
it. It also given me very Raphael and Tobias from the cut book of Tobit in the Bible. And there was Sir Persisus, who had a deer best friend. He was a lover of Apollo, and when his deer died on accident, he was so sad he became a tree.
How many ancient Greeks became trees or flowers or some kind of plant?
If you were hot and you were sad, they're like, well, it's a waste if we don't. We just let you waste away. I guess it'll be a tree.
They were the original plant gays.
The original plant gays. There's also Hayeka or Haika. I put her full name here. I remember to look up how to pronounce the Japanese thing, so I forgot to look this up. All right. Haika Kaika Pulipele. I'm doing my best. Maybe we'll come back in with a correct pronunciation because
it'll be very robotic.
Yeah, just like we'll paste in the robot. But the Hawaiian patron goddess of hula dancers and sorcery and medicine, she had various female lovers, and there's stories where Pele, the fire goddess, kind of turned one of her lovers to stone. So queer women had some representation too, and there are lots of non-binary deities, and not just Hermaphroditus, the son of Hermes and Aphrodite. But like there's Inari, the Japanese deity of rice, fertility, prosperity, and foxes. Like Inari just showed up however they felt. Old man, young woman, fox, however. And there's the Aboriginal rainbow serpent creator deity who had a variety of genders. So maybe that's where the rainbow comes from. And there are lots of, are these just bros or boyfriends in the ancient mythology?
Ah, yes, my favorite trivia game.
Yeah, Achilles and Patroclus. That's a favorite. That's
ding,
a fan
ding, ding,
popular
ding.
one.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Gilgamesh and Enkidu from the Epic of Gilgamesh, so way, way, way back. Cuchulainn and Ferdiad in the Toyne, potentially. And this is might be a spicy one. David and Jonathan in the Bible.
Whoa.
There's lots of debate happening about that one.
We're gonna have to go on AO3 and just see how many things there are.
Oh, there's definitely Bible fan fiction.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, but I mean, because Jonathan sees David and immediately is like, it says loves him as much as he loves his own self on sight. And so then there's a lot of debate about it comes to translation and who's translating what and blah, 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 blah. But there's some strong evidence. I mean, but again, they didn't have homosexual in the Bible until the 40s. So like the movie Snow White, you could have watched it and no one and homosexual wasn't in the Bible, just to like put that in the timeline. Like people were aware of Dopey the dwarf before homosexual was in the Bible.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's truly wild. There's also, okay, I discovered this is the rabbit hole I was talking about. So this book called like The Dog in the Sea or The Dog and the Sailor, and this person is saying on Forbes, favorite academic resource Forbes, that talking about Thompson of Arne Thompson Uther, the ATU index, that he was homophobic and he cut gay tropes for being unnatural perversions like bestiality, so erasing queer fairy tales. And there is like Thompson did say that, right? But then this guy, Peter, I think he's Cornish. He wrote this book and later another collection of fairy tales being like, these are like the lost gay fairy tales.
Oh.
However, this Tumblr user was doing the Lord's work and was like, I really wanted to find this story and was like contacting, because it hadn't been translated to English. So contacting like Danish and Frisian friends and like Dutch friends and like doing all this research. And they found the story and you could interpret it in a queer way, but it was not like, oh, that's gay, as the author of the book was trying to say. And so this author is taking stories that maybe have queer elements and rewriting them to be something that is more marketable to a modern queer audience. And they're specifically for children. So I don't think there's anything wrong with, we family-friendly fairy tale stories all the time. So like he's just doing that in a queer-friendly way, which is great. But I think it's very interesting that the way it's being marketed is something that's lost. And I'm like, what a great rainbow capitalism thing, where like the only stuff I can
those tales,
yeah, like the only stuff I can find is about someone trying to sell us something. I'm like, interesting.
I love scammers, so I respect the grift with this one, to be honest with you.
It's giving Anna Delvey, yeah. So part of me was like, oh, that seems like a cute book, but the person like compared a lot of the elements with, and they're like the easiest queer reading would be asexual. But so interesting. But that doesn't really have anything to do with All of Us Strangers. That was just kind of our little Pride Month.
Loved it. Like having it. Do you know, speaking of all of those various deities, I love the remits that each of them had. Sorcery, hula dancing, and just all of these elements. And that truly is the queer experience. Like I am absolutely on board. Yeah, these are our queer deities. And yeah, when it comes to that fairy tale and that collection, these reinterpretations of fairy tales, we're constantly doing it anyway. So collectively we are. So
And
Why not?
what is All of Us Strangers if not a complete reinterpretation of that original story? See,
Truly.
there's a link in
Endless,
everything.
like,
Yes, yeah. It is. Because I think we talked about this in Cinderella when Andrew from Gluck the Week was like, is there a need for another Cinderella? And we're kind of like, I feel like if you were to do another Cinderella, it'd have to be gay
Right.
because
Everything else has been done.
it's been
She's
done
been a
and then
girl
done again.
boss,
yeah.
like, and girl boss is out now.
She's
Okay,
been a
so
girl
like,
boss. She's been post girl boss reinterpreted, like
yeah.
everything. Yeah. There's even
Yeah.
a Soviet version, like
Every possible Cinderella.
yeah.
Are there future Cinderellas still to be Cinderellaed? I guess we'll have to.
Cinderfellas.
Cinderfellas, have courage, be kind, all
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. So Strangers, this novel was published in 1987. It is about a middle-aged, recently divorced television writer, Harada. And so this has connection with some ghosts. So you may know ghosts from Jennifer Love Hewitt's show Ghost Whisperer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Famously
famously.
invented the ghost. There's also a Justin Bieber and a Katy Perry song called Ghost. If you haven't seen the show. So that might be where you've heard of ghosts.
That's
Right.
possibly, yeah, that's the foundational,
That
two
makes
foundational
sense.
texts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Japan has a very big ghost or spirit culture history. So they Shinto, which is traditional Japanese religion, has an acknowledgement of kind of spirits everywhere and in everything called kami, and they like prominent kami are deities. And there's also ancestor veneration, that like the spirits of your ancestors, if they're properly honored, will help protect you and your family. So it's a very spiritual worldview. So that also leads to sometimes malevolent ghosts, right? Like there's yurei, and they're ghosts who are attached to life because of a strong emotion or unfinished business. So this seems very familiar to people who know a ghost whisperer, right? Like
Yeah.
there's something tying people to this world, and it's a more general umbrella for all kinds of ghosts that are kind of stuck. It's generally seen as hostile. But the Yurei, they can be put to rest or appeased. So by being deified, building them a shrine, honoring them, or having their business completed. One guy got to become the god of scholars. They're trying to like calm him down. How iconic that it's like,
Yeah.
I will fuck with your shit until you make me a god.
I will be a poltergeist until you make me a god. Yeah.
Yeah, with that unfinished business stuff, like Sadako in The Ring, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yurei queen gets the unfinished business done, and even then is still petty, still holds the vendetta, still
That's true.
is haunting them. Several
She
sequels
wanted that
and so
sequel
much.
money though.
Yeah.
She was in it for the long haul. I
Yeah.
think.
She was getting a big cut of it. That's
She
why.
was, yeah. And the girl from The Ring is kind of a classic example of a Yurei and a Onryo, which were a kind of Yurei. And like she pulled from traditional style and helped cement the style of what these ghosts were supposed to look like to audiences. So they are vengeful. They can be both genders, and historically there were lots of stories of both men and women, but classically it's a woman, and they're a wronged woman. They were killed by murder or suicide or neglect, a woman scorned, if you will. Very Carrie Underwood before he cheats kind of energy. They were seeking justice for the crimes against them and would cause disaster, from earthquakes to personal tragedies, and they would take the souls of those who had wronged them to the underworld with them. And their classic thing was they are typically pale with white robes and like dark hair, like the girl in The Ring. And so it's like that style was established pre The Ring, and then The Ring became a pop culture phenomenon, so that just like cemented that in. But it was a connection with traditional Japanese imagery of like, pale with the dark hair, and that kind of like tragic, unkempt look. And that'll come up as we talk about the book.
See, the thing is, I don't know a great deal about Japanese folklore and mythology, but I knew, obviously through like Studio Ghibli films, things like Spirited Away, these associations with spirits being, kind of having a different vibe to them than Western and particularly English ghost stories. So where you would get these stories about like vengeful spirits and kind of the returning of like repressed or awful things like being hidden, and that does come up in English ghost stories. Like there are some very unusual and obscure Japanese mythological kind of characters and what's the word, yokai, which is kind of the encompassing term for kind of paranormal entities, which includes ghosts and vampires and monsters and things like umbrellas that hop around by themselves.
The fairy tellers have some great episodes on yokai. Our friends over there. So if you want to hear more about yokai, you can hear about it from Jeff, who used to live in Japan.
Brilliant.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, most of my pre-established knowledge of yokai and Japanese folklore is via Pokemon. So there is, well, I mean, there are Pokemon who are based on Yurei. Like, it's unusual. And even then, that knowledge has slipped to the back of my mind, because previously I might have been able to tell you what that Pokemon was called, but critical.
Sometimes you think it's gone, and then you're watching the Bionicle movie,
and then it all comes back, and then you do a 4-hour episode on it.
Except you call one of the leads the name of Pocahontas his dad instead of his actual name for half an episode. It is yes, it's a very rich history, and it's much more active. I think in the West we have this kind of like, I mean, I've been on some pretty intense ghost tours, but like that's like superstition, right? And like in Japan there's a lot more like, this is a shrine for this Yurei or this Onryo, and like we're going to build our infrastructure around it. We're not going to tear it down. People try, like the US came and was like, we got to tear this down, and then like trucks were flipping over and people were dying. So they're like, we don't mess with this, it's similar to, I believe, like Iceland, where they're like, that belongs to the elves. And I support that.
Respect where it's due.
Respect where it's due. Yeah,
exactly.
One of my favorite parts when I read the Joan of Arc biography by Mark Twain, she's back, she keeps coming up, was when like the priest did an exorcism of the fairy tree, and she like freaked out because she's like, that's where they live. But that's our lore. So all of us strangers, I think what we'll do is we'll kind of go through the movie, and I put 3 little check-ins to kind of be like, here's what was going on in the novel. Because the novel is it's still a very simple story, but there's a little more moving parts. And this is very much like a therapy session.
On film,
but very beautifully shot, very vibrant colors, very hazy, or was that just my tears? I don't know.
In Blur-O-Vision,
We start with Adam, a procrastinating writer. I'm attacked. I'm catching strays from the moment this movie opened.
Yeah, because he's just staring at the blank screen, and I'm like, how dare you? How dare you?
Yeah, and final draft too.
Yeah, wow. And there's not even a freaking like interior, exterior, nothing. It's just a blank. I was like, that's rude. I am attacked.
And so he's just procrastinating. He's watching TV, and he realizes he's alone in the building because their alarm goes off. He's alone in the building, and he sees one other guy in like one of the windows. So there's only one other person in his building. But he's kind of isolated. But later that night, Harry, Paul Mescal, shows up, and is maybe the reason I realized I had to put subtitles on for this movie.
Same. Oh my God. And what's weird is that, and it's not the accents, because I watch movies with accents all the time. I think it was really just like the audio was also like, they weren't talking super clear.
He was talking very
low. Stylized and stuff, which was great, but I'm like, no, I do need subtitles.
Yeah.
That's so wild.
two things there. Yeah, absolutely, Hannah. His enunciation, but I don't know what it is with sound mixing in films these days. But I find the dialogue is like mixed really low. In fact, Challengers. Speaking of Challengers, that was extreme. I cannot hear what the characters are saying over all of the other stuff that's going on. But yeah, Paul Mescal also not doing his own accent, going for a Mancunian accent here. I say
if British and Irish filmmakers need somebody to do a regional accent, there is one man who will always answer the call, and it is Paul Mescal. He has not done his own accent in a film for a long time, bless him.
Yeah. I love when they make like, okay, we need you to do a different accent. Where you're from, no relevance to the storyline. Like, you could just do your original accent.
Yeah, right. And also, it doesn't help that his character's drunk. And so it's like that on top of everything. It was just like, yeah, the subtitles got to come on.
Subtitles on. I watch most things with subtitles now as well.
I do too.
Yeah, it needs to be done.
I thought I was just getting old. I think it's just the sound mixing these days.
Yeah, they're gaslighting us.
Or maybe it's both. Or maybe they are gaslighting us. Yeah.
They're gaslighting us, and that's why they're making movies long with no intermission, because they want us to have UTIs.
Yeah.
Yeah. He shows up to kind of be like, oh, we're alone in the building. I see you looking at me. He's giving very flirty eyes because I'm having trouble understanding what he's saying, but I can read the body language. And Adam's kind of like, no, thank you. Like, good night. Shuts the door. And he goes back home to see his parents. He goes to a house and he just kind of walks in. And it's this happy reunion that's also very chill. Like, he's not really shocked. It's just kind of like, and they're happy to see him. They're frozen. They're younger than him. They're in their 30s. And they're just kind of drinking and dancing. They're like, oh, you're a writer? And the dad's like, oh, writers don't know shit. And she's like, oh, shut up,
Yeah, and he also says, I'm not really a writer.
Yeah.
I'm a screenwriter. I was like, no, hang on.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. I can pull out my diploma. I can show you my degree. I'm a proper writer, and I'm a master of it.
I can't because BU never sent it.
I knew you were going to say that. That could be another drinking game because, you won't get drunk as often other than the baptism.
The baptism, my canceled baptism, yes. Yeah, so he's just having a good time with his parents. And so we're going to do check-in 1 here. Because there's a lot going on. Like, this is a much more simplified story, which I think works. I don't think the movie adaptation needed all the stuff I'm about to share from the book. So the book, there's Harada. He's broke. He's lonely. He has a college-age son that he doesn't really talk to. He's divorced. It was his idea. It was mostly fine. He's like, she took all the money, and he felt like she was just waiting for him to say it. He is in a tiny apartment that's basically in an office building, working on a show about billiards and tennis. It was cool to hear about like the Japanese entertainment industry in the 80s. It's like picking up like stuff he said that people say that's very similar to Hollywood now, but also it's different. And he's excited when his friend Manu comes by, who's a coworker, producer that he really likes. And this is where you could do a gay adaptation of this, because he talks about, I really liked him because one time this actor started stripping we were going out after drinks, and he started doing a striptease. We were all hanging out, and he's like, and it was like not the establishment. People were giving looks, and I thought my friend was going to intervene and calm him down, but he just started stripping too, and that's when I realized how much I liked him. And you're like, okay. But he's like, are you okay? Or how are you holding up? Maybe you should talk to your son. And he's like, why is that your business? And he's like, well, I want to date your wife. And he's like, and so I don't think we can work together anymore. And he's starting to do the math of how, because they've only been divorced about a month and all this. And he's like, I think something's been going on.
See, again, clearly a gay adaptation. Like, in the L Word, they had like the chart of who's been with who and whatnot.
Yeah.
There you go. Like, could have adapted that, Andrew Hay. I mean,
True. There was I saw a meme the other day that was like how a gay group of friends knows each other. It was all like exes met on Grindr, you know, like
one-time thing, yeah.
Yeah. So he's upset, he's feeling betrayed. And then the only other neighbor comes by with champagne. It's a woman named Katsura, but she goes by Kay. It's the Chinese reading of her name because her name is like two trees, like her first and last name. She's like, that's two trees too many. So she's like, oh, I just had some leftover champagne. Like, would you like some? And he's mad because he's going through stuff and he just kind of rebuffs her and shuts the door. So it's not as obviously a sexual advance, but she's younger. He's in his 40s. She's in her 30s, and she's just looking for company. Then he's worried. He's like, what if she was about to kill herself? And he goes down and he sees that the light's still on in her place. And he's like, okay, it should be fine. He is going to his hometown, Osaka, which is like a distant suburb of Tokyo. And this is all going on during the time of the Bon Festival, where people celebrate their ancestors.
Oh, okay.
And so he goes to his hometown for his birthday, and he talked about how much it's changed. The International Theater is torn down for a resort. He talks about his parents who were killed when his mom was pregnant, and they were bike riding near the theater, and they were hit by a car. And I think his uncle said it was most likely a U.S. military personnel, and so there was no investigation into it. And
unfinished business.
Yes. So he then, he was raised by his grandfather and then his uncle, and so he, is emotionally unwell. And I love that this novel acknowledges that. And so he goes to like a comic. It was also cool to hear about like how theaters were functioning in like the theater district in this time in Japan. And like you just kind of like go in and there's a comic and there's like a tour group and they leave and then another comic goes on and the jugglers act.
That's what I was wondering, because I thought, is this a stand-up comedy show when he first went into the theater, and then there was like a magician at some point, and I thought
we didn't have any of the context of it because we were watching the film, so it seemed like what's going on. In 80s Japan, it was all very different. Because the stand-up comic was also sitting down, which was really upsetting.
Yeah, they're talking about him sitting.
That's not the thing.
It's not called sit up.
Yeah, well, maybe it is.
Oh, maybe it is. Translation. Lost in translation.
Sophia Coppola.
Marie Antoinette.
Kirsten Dunst. So he's watching this comic, and so he hears a voice kind of heckle the guy, like tease him, and he's like, that sounds just like my dad. It's giving Gorgug, are you my dad? And then he looks and he's like, that guy looks just like my dad. And he's kind of like trying not to follow him, but kind of figure out what he's up to. And his dad essentially sees him and it's like, oh, let's go get a drink. Let's go back. Let's go home. And like he realizes he's just kind of following this man home, and they're buying cigarettes and they're buying alcohol, and they go home and he meets the wife and they're just drinking and having a good time, and he still is like, these are just he accidentally calls them mom and dad. He's like, they're not who they are. They're just these people that look just like them, but they have modern technology and everything, so like they couldn't be my parents. They're younger than me. And then he like takes the cab home, and they're all like, oh, hurry back, see you soon, come again. And he's like repeating it again and again, and the cab driver's like, cool it, man.
It's interesting. In the Discarnates, that section with the parents, or any time that he visits the parents, is like really idealized. It's like the lighting shifts to this very golden sort of little nostalgia bubble, and it is very different from what we see of the sort of day-to-day street scenes. And in the main character's apartment, he's called Hidemi in the movie rather than Harada. And it just has a different feel. But it's interesting where things are similar and where they're different, because they both go on a train journey. It's almost like this, like the train journey between where they're staying at the moment and the hometown is that's like the kind of going through the gate almost. Like this
Yeah.
is where the kind of supernatural or whatever can come into the equation.
Mm.
And in All of Us Strangers, it's a very cruisy experience for him encountering his dad.
Yes, I also got that too, because you're saying that in the book, he's sort of like shocked to
Yeah.
see his dad or hear his dad. But in All of Us Strangers, it kind of seems like he sees this guy watching him in the park and he's like, I know this person, or I know what's going on at
Yeah.
least. And yeah, it does feel a bit
It
cruisy.
is a bit cruisy, yeah.
And then when they have their meeting at, basically he follows them to, the shop, he's getting cigarettes, and it's really strange because like it feels like he knows what's going on, but then we find out it's his dad. And so it actually made me wonder if like this isn't the first time it's happened or if it is the first time.
Yeah. I think because in the book, it's very much like this is the first time this is happening. In the movie, it feels like he's not really shocked at all. And
it's like he was expecting it.
yeah.
And to kind of take it into talking about like it being a fantasy, like a fantasy film or fantasy story, is that in our adaptations class, I was talking about the different types of fantasy stories, whether you are always in this world or if there's like a portal or a way to get into the fantasy world.
Yeah.
And that train journey is kind of like him going into like the fantasy world.
It's the wardrobe.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I did not honestly pick up on, I see it now. I did not pick up on the cruising, but that's very funny because there's a park I used to like to go to that I didn't realize was a cruising park. And I went there with my friend and he's like, there are all these men and they're all looking at us. And it was like twilighty. It was like during lockdown, it was my birthday and we were just going, and he's like, everyone's like checking us out who walks by. Then he's like, I'm pretty sure it's a cruising park. Then he texted me later. He's like, I Googled it. Yeah. But I was just like, oh, what's a park near me? And, LA has the lowest parks per capita of any major city in the US. So it was the park near me. That was a cruising park.
Yeah, this is the thing. So Michael and I have both done like a lot of community related work and like health
community
promotion work. So yeah, doing kind of public health, sexual health testing and giving out condoms and
giving out condoms in bars.
locations.
Let's not dress it up.
But you get a sense of the landscape. But yeah, that whole aspect of the first encounter with the dad almost being like cruising, I think speaks to one of the themes of this film, which is sort of uncomfortable in that familial love, romantic love, sexual love, kind of all drawing from the same pool in some ways.
Yeah.
And I'd listened to an interview with Andrew Haigh where he said, yeah, the choice for there to be a level of resemblance between Jamie Bell and Paul Mescal was deliberate. So it's like, okay. So a little bit of Freud going on there.
Yeah.
So.
And not to jump too forward, but there's the scene where he's in bed with his parents and he turns and it's not his dad, it's Paul Mescal.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was really interesting. And there was a park near BU. People would give out condoms there. By like the community garden.
Yes.
Yeah, by one of our classmates who would not be going to that park, but around where they used to live, and where I used to go to church. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so he sees he's back in his place. He's back in his regular life, and he sees Harry again, and they start having drinks. They're having flirty leg body language, and they start to kind of. They hook up. For a second, I thought it was very interesting, like, because he's fully undressed and Paul Mescal still has his shorts on, and I thought that was going to connect to something I'm going to bring up from the book, but no, it didn't. I was like, because I was like, because I had finished the book before I watched the movie, I was like looking for those connections, and the movie goes in a very different direction, so I didn't need to be. And so he's hooking up, and then kind of almost the next day, you see him having coffee with his mom, or tea, and she's like, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend? We're talking about it." Like I think like someone who's not too thin with like brown hair, like a smart
Smart,
girl.
obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's funny because she's
Belle
almost like
girl.
describing herself.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
Mm,
Well, also, I think the other thing that's really interesting is that you said in the book these people have like modern appliances. This home does feel stuck in time in like
Hmm.
the 80s.
Yeah.
And because her hair is very
Hmm.
80s. Her whole look is. So that's kind of interesting is that like I think that's another thing that lends to it being a fantasy world is that he's literally like in a different time and place, essentially.
Yeah. Well, I think in the book has a lot more of like, are these my parents? And this is just like
Mhm.
these are his parents, So by setting
Yeah.
it in that time bubble, it just communicates that faster.
Yes. Yeah.
And it gives us that feeling that you're talking about, like the golden nostalgia. But I think it's very interesting compared to the book and maybe that film adaptation to like this is it's like idealized, but yet not. Like they're still very
Yeah.
human, flawed people.
And I think the guessing whether or not they are his parents would distract from what the movie is trying to do,
Yeah.
which is give him opportunities for closure and communication and stuff.
Yeah, I think that aspect of the 80s-ness of the time bubble, that specificity of these are the clothes, and particularly we'll get to it, but this is the music.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like that is so important to the texture of those scenes, that specificity. And that's what it kind of makes the themes of it feel even more universal because of these very specific details in a weird
Yeah.
way.
I
And
think. Sorry, I think the other thing on that though for this film and like particularly it being set in the 80s is the AIDS crisis being like this
Yes.
Yeah.
almost a ghost in and of itself, like
Yeah.
haunting the edges of this film. And I mean, I think they've had the conversation about that before. He goes to talk to his mum, like Paul Mescal and Andrew
Yeah.
Scott, who I know have character names, but listen,
Adam and
it's just,
Harry. Yeah.
but it does feel like this thing that sort of creeps around at the edges of the whole of this film for me.
Yeah, as it does kind of to the gay community at large.
Mm,
The AIDS community is a big generational difference. Like those who were alive during it, those who are alive after, those who remember, it's in our post-Glee world, it seems like a far time, but it's
Yeah.
really that's not that far.
mm,
Uh, so it's yeah, but I think setting it in the 80s at the height of that, right? Like, because his basically when he comes out, he's like, Mom, I'm not really into girls. And she's like, well, what does that mean? He's like, I'm gay. And she's like,
Like
uh,
homosexual? It's like,
yeah.
yeah, like that.
And she's like, you don't look homosexual.
What
And
does that
what
mean?
does that mean? She's like, you know what it means.
Yeah.
so so much of the dialogue rings true. I mean,
Yeah.
so for us, we're in our mid-30s, right? So Paul Mescal's character, here we go with the actor names again, right?
No, I
So
do. It's funny
Harry,
because I think it's Adam. I see him as his character name. The other guy is Paul Mescal.
yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so Adam's like mid to late 40s, I would guess.
Yeah.
Right.
Harry is like mid to late 20s, and then the parents are kind of around 40, I would say, like kind of or mid 30s as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sort of generationally, like so much has, even within the last 10 years, so much has changed, and so
Yeah.
much has sadly regressed. And for all the steps forward and steps sideways that we've had. But one of the really interesting things that comes up in the dialogue, and again, bearing in mind like the massive advances that there's been in terms of the treatment of HIV, for the vast majority of people diagnosed with HIV, taking one pill a day gets their viral load to a point where it's undetectable and therefore untransmissible. And that there's sort of so much to explain, but Adam just kind of says to his mom, everything's different. And her reaction is, well, I guess I wouldn't know about that.
Yeah.
And that there was something about that, not only in the sort of metaphysical sense as whether she's a ghost or like a literal ghost or like a manifestation of how he's feeling or wants to say, or what he wants to say, the conversations that he wishes that he had, that sort of stuck in the mudness of I guess I wouldn't know about that sort of resistance to making progress is so much at the heart of this film. And that conversation between Adam and his mum is hugely important. I think that's one of the centerpieces of the film.
It's incredibly well written, because I think you could easily just make her be like blatantly homophobic or like, but it's this kind of line that she's just she has a more complicated view and relationship. That's, you know, as much to do with like her vision for her son, her desire for him to be happy. She's like, you know, what about this disease? And, you know, she says, you know, will you be like, I hear it's a very lonely life.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, no, but I mean, I am lonely, but it's not
He's like,
because I'm gay.
I would be lonely even if I wasn't gay. Yeah.
Yeah. So much of this film is about, it's complicated, but not for the reasons that you're imagining that it's complicated. It's and I love that complex, because we rarely see that, do we, when we have films about, you know, maybe parents, you know, children reconnecting with their parents or confronting them. It's a confrontation, it's about the homophobia or whatever. But I love that this film draws out that it is more complex and that feelings and perspectives do shift around and it's not set, and it's that those in themselves are kind of liminal zones, you know.
This is just because I think it is less idealized in the book parents, and I think that makes it a more interesting watch. Like the book is very interesting, you know, for a lot of other things that are going on, but like I think to watch and like feel the emotions, like this was really, and I think Claire Foy just does such a great job in the scene, conveying so much. And this scene really did stand out. And you know, we have him talking to his dad as well, where he's like, oh, you know, mom told me, and he's like, I always kind of knew, and I would hear you crying in your room all the time because of, you know, what was happening to you at school. And why didn't you tell me? And Adam is like, well, why didn't you talk to me when I was crying? And he talks about how he was bullied, and he said, and the dad was like, you know, because I realized that like if I was that age, I would have done that to you too. But children are also little cunts.
Yeah. Which is also true.
Yeah.
True.
And he talks about like like certain ways his dad would tell him not to like fold his legs like a woman, or, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these little things that, you know, I'll kind of speak for myself, but I heard similar messages and I internalized them, you know, and it does inform so much of your behavior and sometimes your thoughts and your feelings, and it is really difficult to unpack. And I think having that, you know, those aspects of the queer experience, for want of a better word, represented on screen is quite cathartic. And it's like, I feel seen.
Yes.
My dad, if he watched, I don't know if I could watch this with my parents, but my dad probably feels seen. But that's Jamie Bell's performance in that scene as well is that made me cry. So that was the point in the film where I was like, yeah, okay, welling up now. But again, with the casting of Jamie Bell, who as well as Fantastic Four is also well known for Billy Elliot, originating that role, and that, you know, being in a film that was really successful as a child. There's something about that casting as well that kind of plays into this all thematically. But I think this is such a good cast. These four are so well cast, and it's
I think the outcomes of those two scenes are very interesting, because with his mom it starts very high and we end really low because they're sort of on rocky ground. And I don't know if we get that sort of moment of aftermath with him on the train, but after he's with his dad, which starts low and ends on a
An
really
embrace, yeah.
emotionally satisfying and releasing, that like you see him, he's on the train and he looks like peaceful and happy.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting the differences between that. It's like he's resolved things with his dad pretty quickly, but it's the stuff with his mom that's lingering, which is, I think, a little bit unexpected. It's just really interesting, the sort of the dynamic between those two scenes.
I think it's very much a stereotype of that, like the mom would be more accepting and the dad wouldn't, right? Like, so it's like I think we are surprised when it's the dad who's more accepting. But I think it's good because sometimes it's, there's a propaganda machine that, that women don't contribute, straight women don't contribute to homophobia. And we all do as a society. It's all our problem. And so I think it's like the nuance of both their reactions, that neither of their reactions are perfect, they're slightly different, everything that's going on. And
which there's also a moment where Jamie Bell is like, your mom will get over it because she'll realize it's not about her.
Yeah.
And I think like in that moment, but Jamie Bell does kind of admit that like he's also thinking about it in terms of himself, where like, if I was a kid at your age, I would have made fun of you. But he very quickly sheds himself from this and focuses on his son. And I think there is that focus on her still, that she's still focused on like how it's affecting her. Yeah, it's just also really interesting.
Yeah, as it happens, I've been doing some counseling training. So all of this stuff around self and others and kind of communication and how we do all that, watching this film for the second time, having learned so much about that, I was like, wow, there's written all over the film,
Yeah.
And even that moment that you mentioned, Hannah, about the dad saying, yeah, your mum will recognize that this isn't about her, this is about you. And kind of contrasting that with our, early on in Adam returning to the family home, his dad holds his hand for a moment and then pulls away and says, enough of that puffy shit. And it's like, it is that delicate balance of getting so close to sincerity and like emotional earnestness and complete openness, but then something snapping into place where the barrier comes down.
The roles you play, like it's a game of house. And like that's, we live in a society. But
wow,
like
groundbreaking.
We're all playing
Florals
roles
for spring, groundbreaking.
But so he's, his relationship is progressing with Harry, and they talk about, that the differences. Harry, talks about growing up and not really feeling like he belongs. But it's a much, the way he's expressing it is much more arbitrary to us as the viewer, because we're not getting, the stuff that Adam's getting with his parents. And so we have this kind of vague understanding. And I think this is where the line that Hannah sent me was that queer, what was it? Queer takes.
Yeah, he's like, you're queer, right? He's like, yeah, well, we don't really want to use gay anymore or whatever. And he says, yeah, queer is the more polite term. It's like they've taken all the dick sucking out of it. And I was like, that's such a good line. And then I realized, oh, this is my only moment of levity for this entire film. Yeah. So
I love that line. But that scene I find is one of the scenes which I find really crunchy in this film. Like when they're sort of post-coital, Paul Mescal is talking about his experience, and then they're kind of talking about their own experiences of queerness. But it feels like they're sort of post-coital and doing Twitter discourse with each other. It just feels a little bit like, this is not what I'm talking about after I've been on the job. It just felt a little bit, I don't know, there's something, it feels like Andrew Haigh working, I mean the whole film is Andrew Haigh working through something, but it feels more sort of surface level in a way that I just found a little crunchy.
A little more, we live in a society.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this queer shit? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
It is, I mean, it is interesting because it is like some people prefer different words and, another relation to age. I remember having a therapist who was like, I don't like that word because I associate it with like the police
Yeah.
attacking us, like and then other people who are like, I don't like the word gay, like I like queer, like that's more inclusive. Like, so this changing and evolving terminology is another way to play with the generations, but because it's like it's a label, it's connected to like Twitter discourse and social discourse. It does feel crunchy. I think that's a good word compared to like the emotional stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's rooted in idea instead of character.
Yes.
And it can be hard to talk about because people have such strong feelings about those kinds of labels that like to come in favor or unfavor of anyone. I'm not going to do that on this podcast, let alone in a movie. So he's like, I want to, like, well, before they go out, there's a lot of jumping in this movie, so sometimes like where I am in the timeline, I'm getting a little mixed up. But we have a Christmas scene where he's with his parents at Christmas time because earlier his dad he talked about how his dad loved Christmas and setting up the tree and letting him put the fairy on top. And I'm like, of course it's a fairy.
It's our fantasy. There we go. We've got a fairy.
A fairy.
Hey, we've got.
So they're decorating the Christmas tree and they're singing "Always on My Mind," but it's like starts as it's in the background and then they start to like sing as and he's like in his childhood pajamas.
Yeah.
On the ground, like he's
squatting kind of. Yeah. But yeah, like the camera angles look like he's like a little kid height to them. Yeah.
Which is master camera work in that I feel like touched and emotional instead of like creeped out. Because like usually you'd say an adult man pretending to be a child in his childhood pajamas. I'm like, ooh,
Yes.
yeah.
No, thank you.
But I think like it's a lot easier to forgive and kind of ignore the potential weirdness of it is because at this point you definitely know like this is either completely in his mind and so this isn't real anyway, or like this is some sort of episode and this is, really what he's wearing or whatever. But like it's something that you're like, he's going through something. So I'm not gonna think about the potential weirdness. But I was kind of endeared by it because this is the first point where he's in his own kid clothes.
Yeah.
Before that, he was in Claire Foy gave him his dad's sweater.
Clothes. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really interesting that like he's sort of regressing in kind of age, I guess, sort of in his own little fantasy here because like it's fitting the stuff that he's going through with them.
Yeah. Totally. And I think almost that kind of cringe element of him sitting there in his pajamas. And I think so much of this film is kind of to do with the cringeness of absolute sincerity and kind of putting it out there. And even in that scene when his mum is kind of like quietly singing along to Always on My Mind, because she can't herself express what she wants to say, but she's kind of cringingly singing along with the song. I think that like that is so important to this film, that idea of kind of being uncomfortable with just sort of extreme displays of emotion in some ways.
Yeah.
It's my favorite scene in the film, this Christmas. I mean, largely because I love Christmas and I love the 80s. So there's a lot for me to like. But I think one of the things that I really respond to in this scene is when we came away from watching this film was it wasn't my favorite film from like, last year, early this year. But it's the film I probably talked about the most because I was sort of unpicking it so much. And I think one of the things that I kind of thought about quite a lot was that a lot of the film feels like a play to me. Like
Yes.
it feels like a lockdown film, even though it wasn't, because there's no cast in this.
Yeah.
But it also feels like a play. There's a lot of long scenes of people talking and discussing things
Mhm.
and not doing very much. Whereas this decorating the Christmas tree and putting the fairy on top and singing and yeah, at the end of the scene, I think they take a picture,
Yeah.
and it sort of reverts to a picture of him as a little boy. It feels like there's a lot happening in this scene, like both literally and sort of moving the story on for me. I love it. There's so much that I love about it.
It's a great use of music too. Because if this had been another scene of them talking and her coming to a realization or something, that would have felt, it just wouldn't have, I think the using the music to pack the punch and like show the growth, really helps keeps it moving and keeps it from just being another scene of people talking. And it works for her character and like how she kind of struggles to express that.
Yeah.
And we have this thing where he's going to sleep, but he's scared of them going to the Walshes. And kind of as this is all happening, like out in his London life, he wants to go out, to the club where we are,
Nice to be.
Yeah.
I wasn't on the guest list for this club.
No.
I'm actually in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, how can I could key him out and put this in the background. So I might try it.
Literally, just before we started recording, when I logged on to the Zoom session with Cullen, we both had the same background. So the brainwaves are raining.
So they're out, they're at the club, they're in the disgusting bathroom that every gay bar like this has, because they're all based on this club, right? The club. And they do ketamine, which Adam has never done before. So he's like, I'm an emotional episode. Let's do it and put a new drug into the mix.
Let's just do it. Let's go for
That's
it.
gay culture.
It's gay culture. So he's like, oh, well, you'll take care of me, right? And so we get this, like, they're in the club, but then he's Camila Cabello crying in the club. Camila Cabello just crying on earth. And he's kind of like, he's sneaking into bed with his parents, or like being like, oh, can I come in? Like, he can't sleep. And she talks about how, like, oh, he always had to do this. Like, he always had to sleep with them.
And again, this could have been very weird. You're like, oh, he's an adult man.
Yeah.
But like the bigger picture is like he's going through something. And when he gets into the bed, the thing that I was really endeared by is that the jammies are still a little too short. They like come over his ankle. And I was like, that's a really nice detail.
Yeah.
Like it's just a kind of reminder of like he's an adult going through something, going through his childhood, like unpacking that. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Colin. Yeah, the little details in this film are really what makes it for me. Actually, I didn't mention this earlier on, but when Harry first turns up at the flat with the bottle of drink, it's Japanese whiskey.
Yes, it is.
Yay! So just like that little bit of attention to detail and these things, like you're saying, Hannah, about the pajamas being a little bit too short, it all adds up.
Those little, like, I think that's one thing just in general we've talked about with a lot of like these fantasy worlds and stuff. It's like the little attention to detail is a lot of times what makes or breaks a movie, or it makes a world feel lived in and characters feel real. And I think in this scene, it's the acting also of like, it's just played as so non-sexual.
Yeah.
It like, and I feel like other people might have trouble with that. I don't know. It's like it's just like it's played as so maternal, and she's asking about like, I regret that I would always wishing you grew up. Because I wanted him a good night's sleep.
I should have, and then she says, I should have relished you driving me bananas.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting is that, and we'll probably talk about it with the check-in with the book, but like they're aware that they're dead. They're aware that they are interacting with him in such a way that like he knows that they're dead, they know they're dead, and they're sort of expressing regrets about their life.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just really interesting that like it's not like they're just playing out scenes of his past. They're like conscious of everything.
Yeah, but not exactly of how it works and what the rules are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she also talks about like, so who raised you? And well, I went to live with Gren in Ireland. He's like, well, what about your dad's side of the family? And it's like, oh,
she was too heartbroken. And then she
yeah.
goes, oh, right. So my mom didn't care that she lost her only daughter. And I was like, ooh, burn.
Yeah.
I liked the little attempt at rationalizing the bizarre accent mixture that we've got going on in this film.
Yeah.
Andrew Scott's Irish accent, Claire Foy with this very sort of clipped RP accent, Jamie Bell, who is from the northeast of England, so same place as Michael, but has a sort of softened, because Jamie Bell's lived in LA for a long time. I think it's just very, how are all of these people connected?
Related.
So you lived with Granny in Ireland for a while. That is why you have an Irish accent. Thanks for the explanation there.
And it is funny because I could on paper, I could be like, yes, this is what an Irish accent is. This is a Scottish one. This is like a Queen's English kind of. But when I'm watching a movie, I don't notice that they all have different accents. To me, it's
I noticed Andrew Scott's because I was like, wait a second, those don't sound the same.
Yeah. So I'm just like, okay, accent. Maybe I was just too busy crying. I don't know.
Again, yeah, the tears messed up how you could hear the accents.
Yeah. Me going, so
I think there's something in this part of the film, not to keep us here for too long, because it's slightly unpleasant. But in this part of the film, I think it's when there's something in this film about like, I'm sort of obsessed with queer temporality and the concept of queer temporality, that queer people experience time different than heteronormative people.
My familiarity with that is that gays walk faster because they have toxic like Britney Spears in their head, and straight people have pulled closer by the chain smokers, so they walk slower.
That too. That's why I'm late to the club. I think at this point, it's when time starts to really unravel in this film. Like he's almost, up until now in this sort of parts in the past, he's been experiencing things as an adult, going back to talk to his parents, and now he's kind of regressing into being a child, and they're experiencing things as they would have done in the 80s, like putting up the Christmas tree and watching Top of the Pops and stuff like that. And then, but out in the real world, it's not Christmas.
Right.
And I don't know, there's just something sort of, I don't have anything more than like, oh, isn't that weird? But I'm interested in it. That's the thing with this film. I feel like I've watched it and it's such a sort of puzzle box to be opened up and played with, rather than something to come away with a like fully formed, I thought this was good and here's my 3 reasons why.
Because I mean, now it's like we get this like blending, because like Paul Mescal's in bed with him, and then he sees ambulance lights and he's screaming, and because he's freaking out remembering their death, and so Paul Mescal is like, oh, you started screaming out for your parents in the club. And so
Camila Cabello did not do that.
Listen, who amongst us has not had? We've all had bad nights.
So he takes them back, and so I took you home. And this is where he talks about how he lost his parents, that they were drinking and driving on their way back from the Walshes at Christmas. He was supposed to go, but he was asleep, and his dad died immediately, but his mom lived a couple days, and she ended up dying alone because they didn't want him to see her because of her eye. So and he talks about looking for the glass as a kid and like finding it, and looking for her eye.
And then he ended up finding the glass.
It's my favorite bit of the film, as well as the
Yeah.
Christmas bit. I just love a weird detail, and I that feels incredibly truthful to
Yes.
me.
Yes.
It feels like it's something
that
a kid would do. Yes.
Yeah.
that kid going out to find that eye
Like he
just
knew
feels.
the mom lost her eye. He didn't see her. So, and he probably didn't know anything of like whether or not they had collected stuff at the scene.
Mm,
And so, yeah, he went back like trying to find the last piece of her that he could, basically.
mm.
Yeah.
So let's do a quick our check-in too. What's going on in the book. So in the book, there's a lot of work subplot, a lot of him writing, and we don't need to
Good
really get
thing,
into that.
good thing Adam doesn't do any work, really.
Yeah, no work
I mean,
at
there's a
all.
couple small spots where he's been writing, but
Yeah.
yeah. No
Renumbered the
manuscript yet.
scenes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there in the book, there's this thing where he can't see it, but he is aging and looking haggard after each interaction, and is like people are looking at him like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" Like people are freaking out. He's dating and having sex with Kay, who is giving very much like Woman in Adam Sandler movie, like just I'm suddenly here, I'm suddenly everything you need. But she won't let him look at her chest or her breast because there was a bad burn that she had some failed skin grafts on, so she always wants it covered. There's a lot of emphasis on her being very white, having a white butt. A lot of lots of different visits to his parents, but he's getting so haggard, and she starts weeping over him, Kay, and like begging whoever will listen to like deliver him from this. And at that moment, he sees himself as old and haggard, and he passes out. And she's like, keeps being like, promise you won't see them. And he keeps doing what men do and lying and flaking and sneaking out. And he runs into his friend slash wife's new lover, Manu, who is like, you look like death. So he's not doing well. Okay, back to crying. Okay.
Now back to me crying.
Now back to me. This is me screaming. He takes Harry to see his parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he can't get in. No one's there. It's dark. And Harry's like, let's get you home. Like, you look upset. And he's like, let us in, let us in. And at one point you see his parents in the reflection just kind of standing there.
Mm-hmm.
Very
That was
like
a little bit creepy, wasn't it? A little bit
Yeah.
horror film. There are little flashes of horror in All of
Yes.
Us Strangers, whereas Strangers, the novel, and the Discarnates kind of leans into that. Yeah, it's certainly supernatural. Occasionally flashes of proper horror in there, more so towards the end with the Discarnates. But yeah, things like a lot of it's to do with the reflections in All of Us Strangers.
Yeah.
Like he sees that distorted reflection of himself as a young kid around this point as well. And then the parents kind of look like corpses in the reflection in the window because they're so pale and far away and you can't quite see
and they're standing very
features.
stiff.
Mm-hmm.
For a second, I'm like, is he gonna look in and see the corpses like propped up like Weekend at Bernie's? You know, like Cheryl in Riverdale hanging out with her brother's corpse.
Yeah, I think that the element from the book about him physically aging and kind of being drained, almost like a vampire, is sort of draining the youth from him, and Kay's reaction to that, sort of suggesting that the parents are the cause of that happening, like the visitation to the parents. Oh, promise me you won't go and see them anymore, and that's how it plays out in the Discarnates as well. Similarly.
This emphasizes that he has a fever. There's a lot of, oh, you're so hot, you have a fever.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not all that suggestion of you're not compos mentis, there's something going on that's not quite right.
And so he wakes up and he's in the house with his parents, and it's morning, and they're like, oh, why don't you let me in? Why don't you let Paul in? And they're like, I don't think Paul, Harry. And they're like, why? I don't think it works that way. But you see them like, we need to let him go. We need to, this isn't good for him. So his parents come to that conclusion of like, we knew this couldn't last forever. And I think like, this isn't helping you anymore. They also ask if she asks if it's his special friend. I'm triggered.
And he confronts her, yeah. And he's like, you can just ask if he's my boyfriend, She goes, okay, is he your boyfriend? He's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I was like, okay, maybe save that one till you have a clear answer, buddy.
Yeah, really. I was like, whoa, you're really coming out. Oh, you don't have an answer. Cool, okay.
In a way, he is just his special friend.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, he's handsome. He seems really nice. But they're like, this has to end. And they decide to, and it's very like, I think it's interesting. A lot of the other scenes, this is just clearly morning. And I think that's interesting that it's like it's a new day. And they're like, let's go to your favorite place in the world. It's the closest thing to Disneyland because they talk about going to Disneyland. Like he would write fan fiction as a kid about what he was doing with his parents and how they would fight all the time. And she's like, well, why did we have to fight? And she's like, well, that's what other kids did with their parents. And we'd go to Disneyland and Space Mountain would be closed and
he just wanted normal interactions.
Yeah.
Like very, just like very like mundane things. Like, yeah, we would fight. Of course we would.
Yeah.
That one actually made me really sad to think that like, because like I imagine this probably happens with like kids who lose their parents. Like maybe they spend a lot of time thinking about like the normal stuff they would have done with their parents. Like that one hit me.
Yeah, and I think as well with his profession as a writer, and all those imagined conversations that you could have had or wanted to have. That all that kind of feeds into my interpretation of the film as well, that so much of this is how he would have written it to go.
Well, also speaking of him as a writer, he does admit that his script is about his parents, so he is technically writing fan fiction about his parents.
So they go to like an American themed diner to say goodbye.
As you do, like of all the places, like the closest thing to Disneyland for little Andrew Scott was this like tacky mall with
But that's what kids
like Disneyland
love.
when you're there.
I suppose.
Yeah, I also like malls. I associate with death as well because half of them are empty.
Yeah.
Liminal zone.
Yeah.
So they're asking, we don't want to ask, don't ask him. And then she's like, was it quick? Did we die quickly? And he lies and he says they both died quickly.
Yeah.
And she's like, I know you're fibbing. This isn't the time to fib. And they're starting to fade. And they're like, we love you. We're so proud of you. And like she's like, why can't I see you? This line gets me where she's like, why can't I see you? Because like she loses her eye.
Well, and Jamie Bell like goes completely blank because he's essentially started to pass on. Or has passed on, but he's still there. It's very eerie. Like I think to me that is horror. Like it's a ghost, but you're seeing he never saw his parents die, but he's seeing his parents die.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting inversion actually of what happens in the Discarnates, and I assume might happen in the book as well. So in the Discarnates, they go for a dinner at a restaurant together.
Hot pot in the book, yeah.
A hot pot, yeah. And but the parents start to fade from the protagonist's view rather than the other way around. And visually it happens. It is like the kind of cheesy fade out effect on the parents kind of disappearing in the Discarnates, and it just struck me that it was a direct inversion of that in Oliver Stranger.
Yeah, and so the waitress leaves, and they keep it vague enough where you can't tell if the waitress saw that there were 3 people or not, because when they order the meal, he's like, oh, that's a lot of food, but she does place 3 milkshakes,
and she does kind of, you can't quite tell if it's in a line or if it's like in the triangle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A
that's
lot of
interesting.
shake.
And we have to talk about that because the rest of the scene is too sad.
Yes.
But he says goodbye and then he goes to see Harry and he goes to Harry's place.
For the first time. He's never
first
been there before.
Yeah, and it's unlocked. He walks in and he's looking around and he's not seeing him and he goes to the bathroom.
Well, he's hit with a smell first.
Yeah.
Because when he walks in, he's like, and then I was like, oh yeah, I knew it. I didn't want to like spoil it for myself by like thinking about it the whole time. So like I had that thought and I let it go.
Mhm.
So it was satisfying as a story, but
yeah, especially because there was conversation about bath earlier. Like, who doesn't love
yeah,
a bath? And I was like, me. But
same. Not a bath person.
so he goes and he sees Harry's corpse and that he was in the same clothes that he wore that first night that they met. So he killed himself that
The
night.
whiskey bottles there.
Yeah.
The framing of that shot, like, not to be like a film nerd, but like it's that pink shirt that he's wearing, that sort of flesh tone shirt that's all sort of bunched up. Like there's a moment with that shot where I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at, and but I'm filling in the blanks, and it's something horrible.
Yes.
And it's just stunning. It's so stunning. Like, even
Because
watching
that's all
it
you
again.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From like maybe like the chest down to maybe waist or just below waist. He's kind of like curled up, but you don't see face or anything. So
Yeah.
you're just like your mind's sort of filling in the blanks. Yeah.
Which is, I think, a very tasteful
Absolutely.
route.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. And because Harry comes in the same clothes, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't want you to see me like this. I was just so alone." He's like, "Well, where are my parents? Why didn't anyone find me?" And it's this really just heartbreaking thing where, Adam's like, "It's okay, it's okay, I still love you." And they lie in bed and they kind of spoon. As a way, it's almost like you think it's going to be a send-off, but then they start playing The Power of Love, which I know from the cover that they play during Mary Queen of Scots' first wedding on the CW show Rain.
Wow, a Rain reference. It's been a minute since you've had one.
Yeah, here it is, her wedding to Francis. And it zooms out into stars. And that's how it ends, with this kind of ambiguous ending,
Yeah.
We're all stars, they said in Mean Girls, the musical, and Wish.
Yes. Yes, it's true.
Imagine if they had that instead of The Power of Love at the end.
I see stars.
Angry rises, reedy voice. Fan
edit. So before we wrap up our discussion, I'll do a quick check-in 3, because this is probably our biggest, where things really change from the book to the movie. So in the book, he tells his parents he has to go. And they have their last day together. They get temple cakes, or shrine cakes, they get like just different street vendors, and they kind of relish saying goodbye, and they disappear at the hot pot place. Manu realizes, because he sees Harada with Kay, and the landlord is like, "Oh, that looks just like the girl who killed herself." And she killed herself a month ago, and they look at all the records, and it's Kay, but her name's Katsura, and she goes by Kay, and her family buried her and everything. But so Manu comes to Harada and is like, "I don't know what's going on, like, but this," like, he's explaining all this, and he's like, "Why are you so chill about this?" Because he doesn't know that this guy's been talking to his dead parents, But Harada's like, "Well, I still love her. I still want to be with her." But as they go outside, he sees Kay, and she's in a white robe, and she's taking a step at a time, and her look is just sinister and angry. And eventually she's like, "You abandoned me that night. I was alone. I just needed someone. So this was me getting my revenge. It was all a ploy. And now I'm going to drag you to hell." And Mano is like invoking the Buddha with these rosaries. But she's like, "What thwarted me is I knew that once you knew, like, you weren't fully in love with me anymore." So she bleeds and from her chest where she stabbed herself. And she did have an issue with her chest. And there's like, they go to her apartment and there's all these things that relate to death, and it's very traditional, but that's not what's there anymore. It's an office, but like, so she disappears. But he is also like, I still feel like she still loves me. Um, so it kind of leaving with the implication that maybe she was the one who was draining him, because he's still like, after having sex with her, after he leaves his parents and stuff, he's feeling great, but Manu was like, you look terrible. uh so he has a new life, he's in the hospital for a while, but he reconnects with his son, and Manu is like, we can work together, we can be friends, I'm really fond of you, and then I became fond of your wife. And he's like, maybe that's where you took it a little too far. But I mean, the implication or textually, it's like he was a very distant husband, partially because of the issues he had because his parents died. So men will literally have a whole ghost problem rather than go to therapy. And he, puts incense on his parents' grave, and that's kind of how it ends. So much more of a traditional horror movie ending than All of Us Strangers.
Yeah. I also think the other thing about the All of Us Strangers is that if both his parents are dead and it turns out that Harry's also dead, he was alone the whole time, with the exception of like the waitress, I guess. So
Yeah.
like it just sort of like further hits on the loneliness aspect again.
Yeah.
Like he's literally physically alone.
It's one of the things that annoys me about All of Us Strangers. I have to be honest with you. I'm a bit obsessed with it. The fact that I get that it's about his loneliness, but the fact that he doesn't have a single friend, like he's a screenwriter, but he doesn't even have a producer that's phoning him to be like, have you
Right.
finished? Have you done any work? Like you seem to be going through a
We
lot at the
can't keep
minute.
paying you, dude. Like
um and I feel like with when we watch the Discarnates, like he's got friends around him. He's got this, producer friend who's, happens to be sleeping with his wife, his ex-wife. But he still feels lonely. He still feels like pretty desperate and pretty kind of sad. And I just feel like I could have done with him having. I feel like there's some contrast to be had. We hear about these friends that Adam has who are all moving away from London because they have families, and he doesn't have that. And I get that part of it, but like I don't know a gay man that age that doesn't have also loads of gay men friends that are also that age. Like I just want a bit of it.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's because they couldn't have someone there who would be noticing that like maybe he's unhinged, because the movie needs him to live through the fantasy and not be questioned. Because because that's like the whole like ploy toward the end, that like Harry was also dead. So yeah, I agree though, because like it does kind of like hit you over the head then. He's like, see, he's still lonely. So it's sort of like a toss up, I guess. Yeah.
And in the oh, sorry.
Oh, you go ahead. You go ahead.
In the Discarnates, after they discover that Kay is this woman that's killed herself, he goes back to the apartment, and there's a point at which Kay is levitating, and she's got sort of long black hair and showing off these big scars on her sort of chest and things like that. And I just feel like if Paul Mescal had done that in the film, it would have really spiced up the third act.
It is funny because this movie is much less interested in like telling a horror story. This is much more like a therapy story, but without the supernatural. But like Harry's character, Paul Mescal, like he is he doesn't really fully fit into the story other than give him someone to talk to. So to have him be dead doesn't have the same punch, because so in the book, it's like, well, he has a son that he's essentially like neglecting. And it's like you want him to process this and move to the future so he can reconnect with his son. But in this, it's like, okay, if he gets through all this, who is there on the other side? that he can now be there for. And it's like in this version almost makes more sense for Harry to be alive.
Right.
And then there's the natural conflict between being stuck in your past and moving forward. I like that when a movie breaks the rules sometimes, because that is a little more classic Hollywood. I like that this movie is just like, power of love, baby. But like, I do think it does kind of leave the ending of kind of like, okay. Like,
I think that's why I reached for the temporal stuff in it, because I think I wanted him to have discovered that body and for it to be like, oh no, like there's some sort of temporal thing going on here that means actually that didn't really happen, and we can live happily ever after, listening to 80s music and watching Top of the Pops together.
Yeah.
It's weird because I had the same doubts about that ending of All of Us Strangers the first time that I watched it. I'm like, well, what about his other connections? Like, what, you know, who else is in his life? Is he really this lonely? And you know, what is going to happen with getting dicked down by Ghost Paul Mescal?
Yeah.
But I mean, if it worked for Kesha, she got a song out of it, you know. She but after watching the Discarnates and see it, because what I kind of thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if in All of Us Strangers there was a scene where, you know, Andrew Scott goes out into the world and he meets up with his friends or whatever, and that's, you know, and we kind of see the happy ending for him, or we see some kind of resolution in the real world, as it were, like something that was kind of concrete. In watching the Discarnates, we got that. The last scene of the Discarnates is sort of similar to what you were saying about him kind of putting incense on the shrine to his parents. The protagonist and his producer friend are out gardening together and kind of chatting together, but we hear an echo of the parents' voices in the garden. It's kind of implied that it's a place where Hidemi went with his parents as well. So it kind of tries to thread the needle that way. But then on rewatching All of Us Strangers, I really got to the point where I was like, actually, we don't need to see that constellation, those two little stars that they become right at the very end. They're two stars in a whole constellation. There are other sparks, there are other connections, past and present. These are all the people that Adam is connected with. You know, that's what that meant to me, that ending. And in my read of the film is that the ghosts in All of Us Strangers aren't literal entities in that way. I think it is pretty much a therapy movie, and I think that him encountering Paul Mescal, you know, I think it Paul Mescal, what am I calling Harry? Him encountering Harry, that's the conversation that he wished that he had. That's the connection that he wished that he had with this guy that he had turned away on that first night.
Yeah.
And has subsequently found has died by suicide and is or has died on that night. And that regret, this is him trying to address that in his own head. So to me, there isn't going to be a literal happy end for those two. It's all going to be sort of metaphysical.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of what if, I was able to talk about this stuff with my parents, and I think we a lot of us can connect with that. And then there's also a what if, you know, like a lot of people, including myself, have those like, oh, what if I had pursued things with this person, or like, what if this conversation had gone differently? What if we were like, you know, we weren't just on different, you know, what if that connection actually like meant something because we were on the same page, you know, like all that. And people think about that a lot. So I think the movie is kind of exploring that what if part of the MCU show, what if the All of Us Strangers episode. Yeah.
Imagine if Jeffrey Wright just showed up with his big head and it's like, if only Haley Atwell were here, she'd sort you out. Like,
only Haley Atwell were here. That's my thought watching it. Do we, you know, if we think of our protagonist and rooting for him, and we think of our ship of Adam and Harry, where are we standing with that? I definitely want Adam to get through his trauma.
Yeah.
If I ship him and Harry, I don't know if there's anything about that coupling that really struck me like they had some kind of great chemistry or connection. I didn't dislike them together,
Right.
but I think the heart of the movie isn't between them for me, at least. Sorry to
Yeah.
call.
I agree. I'm rooting for Adam to work through what he's working through. And I'm also rooting for him to get his script done because I know how hard that is. Um, I do like their relationship, Harry and Adam. But yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like if there were other people in this building, would they have actually met?
Yeah.
So like having the entire world stripped away and they did meet is sort of like I'm kind of forced to uh grapple with whether or not I ship them. Um, but I mean, I like their scenes together, so there you go.
Yeah, I ship them in the sense that they are hot. But
Yeah.
but again, I think that the actual conversations after that first night, I think the conversations are all fictitious and it's dialogue that Adam has come up with. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul Mescal was not a Pokemon all along. He was a manic pixie dream. What was the name of that movie that was like about the writer who came up with the manic pixie dream girlfriend?
Oh,
Do you know the one I mean?
I know the one. It's like he writes her and then he
Uh-huh.
keeps changing her because he wants to
Yes.
control.
Uh yeah, we'll
Let
come back
me
to that. But
give
yeah,
me some quick
that's kind of
Googling.
my interpretation of what this relationship is.
Yeah, that's actually a good point because their relationship is not only just all in his head, but it is literally a straw man that Adam's controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing there really. It's him falling in love with himself, I guess. That's
No
interesting.
judgment.
Yeah, no, self-love.
I ship Adam with going to therapy, I think, after this
Yeah.
film ends. After he gets up out of that bed, having turned into a star with Paul Mescal, you should,
Yeah.
I don't know, try BetterHelp or something like that.
Not that.
No, maybe not that
No,
actually.
cannot recommend BetterHelp, but actual therapy,
Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
I think it's Ruby Sparks.
Ruby
Yes, that's the
Sparks,
one.
yes,
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
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 So I was getting, they're like, Catherine Hepburn's character bringing up baby. And we're like, I'm like, okay, not. Yeah. So I guess that leads us to our big question. This will
Oh
be an
God.
interesting one. Was that your fantasy?
I have thought about this question
Yes.
because we always say there's two parts. There is this a movie that you liked and you enjoyed something about it? And also, is this something that you would want to experience? Um, I did really love the movie. I think everyone should watch it. There's something I think someone had said that like it's sort of like a puzzle box as you're watching it, after you watch
Mhm.
it, like there's so much to talk about in it. Um, and that's I think always a good sign of a good film. Um, but then in terms of like the idea of being able to talk to someone who's passed and to get closure or even just to have a conversation again, I think is an experience that is an idea I think I would be interested in, but I don't know if I could handle the execution if that were possible for me. Um, and then I also think that like being able to sit down and have, honest conversation with your parents about whatever, baggage there is between you and your parents, I think is also, again, if it were possible, uh, neither of my parents listen to this, so it's fine. That like that would also be an idea I would be interested in. But again, like out of my own self-preservation, I don't know if I would be able to execute that either. So, yeah, that's what I have to say.
Michael, how do you feel?
I think this could get a bit long-winded. So I liked a lot about this film, but after we left it, I talked a lot about it. And I think what I was experiencing was so many people, because this was at a few film festivals before it came out in cinemas. I knew so many people who'd seen it, and particularly queer people who'd seen it and talking about how much they cried while they were watching it. And it was this sort of cathartic, sad, queer ghost story and stuff like that. So I think I went into it expecting that catharsis and kind of having sort of sat with it for a long time. I think the version of queerness that this film presents is a real version of queerness, and I think it's particular to men of Andrew Haigh, the writer director's age, men who lived, who came of age during the AIDS crisis and had all of that baggage going into coming out, and then have lived through, and I'm saying lived through, these are men, I'm talking about men in their 50s, not like, 92-year-olds and stuff. Like, queer people of that age have lived through an enormous amount of progress in a really short amount of time. So there's a lot of baggage there. But I think this version of queerness is a version of queerness which is kind of always unpacking trauma and unpacking sadness. The idea of having those conversations with my parents who are still alive, it doesn't chime with me. And then when I was, just before we recorded, I went on Instagram, and Andrew Scott was in Gay Star News, obviously one of my favorite, most reputable news organizations. But there's this profile of him, and there was this quote where he said, "Sometimes I find it hard when you're doing press because I feel so joyful and so emancipated. It seems like I always want to talk about, it seems like they always want me to talk about the difficulties they have with being gay when actually it's the greatest joy of my life." And I think that's what queerness is to me. I think it is a gift from God. I can't imagine not being queer. I would actually choose to be gay. So I think sometimes the constant unpacking of trauma, which I feel like there's a lot of in this film, it just doesn't resonate as much with me, although I have every empathy for it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when I hear that people have cried all the way through a film and I don't cry when I've seen it, I've come out of it just being like, am I a psychopath, and how do I find out? I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely I get that.
Yeah.
That's a very real aspect of how queerness is represented, the sadness versus joy.
True.
Callum, what are your thoughts? Was this your fantasy?
This was my fantasy. And the reason that I say that is, as somebody that's coming back to it a second time, I don't often rewatch films. This was such an interesting experience in seeing the film initially, kind of having mixed feelings about it, then watching this other adaptation of it, and then coming back to All of Us Strangers and sort of appreciating that it's an interpretation. Like, it brings to the foreground things that were relevant to Andrew Haigh for that filmmaker. Here are the things that resonated with this text for me, and making this sort of purpley, like, bruise of a film about all of these kind of emotional experiences and the good and bad that come with reminiscing and thinking back on how things could have gone, how things were in the past. Again, sitting alongside the fact that I've been doing this kind of counselling training and starting to understand how important having some kind of relationship to the past, and considering how, like, we attach to our parents and all of this stuff, but not living in the past. I think there's something about this film that really crystallizes all of that. And something else I want to mention as well with the music, I love how that specificity of the pop culture of that time, that big Frankie Goes to Hollywood emotional ballad that is sung by a gay man in the early 80s, and pop music as a way of, you know, for kids, for young people, being able to tap into and kind of express an emotion that they might not be able to get across in any other way, or to articulate in any other way. We see that with, you know, Stip Upper Lip, Claire Foy singing Always on My Mind as well. I think there is something specific about how people communicate in this film that I've not really seen reflected on screen before. And the fact that it's wrapped up in this like slightly possibly supernatural and possibly all psychological package is really sort of potent and really interesting to dip into. So yes, it is my fantasy after some consideration.
Nice.
Yeah, those are all such great answers, and I don't know if I can top them. For me, I say, like, as a movie, I definitely really enjoyed. It seems like the wrong word, but I liked it. I thought it was a beautiful film, and I thought it was really well written and shot. And I liked kind of going through, like, feeling those emotions vicariously through those characters, and like seeing that healing again. Is that something my parents are alive, and I would like them to stay that way. So I don't know if I want to live through this particular fantasy. I don't know if I'm ready for ghost sex, supernatural romance month. You saw me through that. Not really my bag. But I think it's like the idea of being able to have those conversations, and I think it's kind of like, this is very The Good Place, but the concept that like death gives things meaning, that sometimes you're like, oh, to have a conversation like that that's so open, like, just isn't worth the energy. And then you're like, oh, but like, if that was your only chance, would you? You know, is it
If you had the chance to change your fate,
would you?
Oh, that was
with the accent, I
fantastic.
couldn't resist. Sorry.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, that was, I was
Mind
gonna
if
come
I
up
keep
with
that clip just to have?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna reference the script. You know, you got to live like you're dying.
That's a deep cut. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, that was All of Us Strangers. Happy Pride.
Woo! Gay trauma.
Get your tissues out.
Yeah. So, Michael and Callum, do you want to give us a little? Do you want to tell our listeners about Once Upon a VHS? Because I think it'd be something they'd very much enjoy.
Certainly, yes. So we started this podcast relatively recently, but it ties in quite nicely with some of the themes of this film. Actually, we're looking back at the fantasy films of the 1980s and 90s, and partly it's a millennial nostalgia fest. How we felt about the films as kids, you know, all the nightmare fuel moments that are in such abundance in films of the of that era, but also kind of reinterpreting the films now as adults on a rewatch, what they've come to mean to us. And yeah, Michael and I have been a couple for 20 years, and one of the first things that we bonded over was Return to Oz. So very much these sort of 80s and 90s fantasy films are kind of in the DNA of our relationship. So we thought this would be a nice way to kind of share some of that. So the first few episodes that we've done, we've recorded by, we're recording by ourselves. So we're going to have a little break and then come back with a season where we're getting some guests on to talk about some of their favorite films. And we would be delighted to have you both on.
Oh my goodness.
Of course, yes.
Feels like a prom proposal.
A prom proposal.
Yes, of course.
Of course. So what color are you wearing? Should I get a corsage?
Yeah.
I remember my poor date when she was like champagne. I was like, wait, is that like red? She was like, Cullen, it's gold.
Oh my goodness.
I know, I'm mixing it up with the hanky code on that pipe. There we go.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a great show. You just did an episode on The Last Unicorn, which is such an interesting movie to talk about. Speaking of puzzles to unpack.
Yeah.
And Hannah's favorite movie. And I like Hook. I was recently at a Renaissance fair and someone was dressed up as Rufio, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's Rufio, and no one else in my group knew the reference. And I was like, wow,
I mean, I
you're
haven't seen
missing
that
out.
movie probably since I was a kid, so wow, I'll have to listen to the episode.
Yeah, it's worth a rewatch. It's so interesting going back to some of these films and the things that sometimes jump out at you that didn't when you were initially watching them at the time,
Yeah.
and then reflecting on even what it was like to hire a video from a rental store and stuff like that. Just how the experience of how we consume media has changed over the years is interesting to look back on. But yeah, Once Upon a VHS, that's our podcast, and you can follow us on Instagram and all the different various social media channels. We'll get this on YouTube at some point as well, but yeah, Once Upon a VHS.
Nice. Definitely check their show out. And if you want to follow Not My Fantasy, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We are at Not My Fantasy Pod. And if you're watching on or listening on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star review and leave a comment. Let us know what you love about the podcast. I mean, you can sound off about this movie. What an interesting addition to our arsenal.
Yeah.
But I mean, I mean, what else would we have been able to like try to figure out how to put this movie in here? And I mean, otherwise I may not have even seen it.
Yeah.
I may have just forgotten about it. So
and
yeah.
speaking of comments, we will be reading our reviews soon because this is our 50th episode.
Oh yeah.
Oh
my
congratulations.
gosh, I completely forgot. Thank you so much. Yeah.
50 episodes, and so it'll be in the description of like the episode, the YouTube, the whatever, and for a couple weeks we will have open the Fantasy Choice Awards.
We're giving out surfboards, baby.
Giving out surfboards. We have nominated all our topics. Some have multiple nominations, some just have one, but we have some awards that you can vote on in a Google poll. I was actually working on that this morning. We have, worst dad, most unsung hero, best throuple, our no TP, best stylish fits, favorite bit, all the, most
all the
slave
important
villainous
categories.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we did not have best hissy fit because, we didn't discover that was a teen choice category until recently, and we've already started putting the poll together. So
yeah,
maybe for next year, we'll start keeping track of the hissy fits.
Yeah. So please vote. There's, I think, 5 nominees in each category. There's only like 16 ones, so it's a quick vote. And at the end of June, at the end of Pride Month, we'll be having a little celebration. And we'll read our comments. We'll read the Fantasy Choice Awards, and just have a good time. So please vote.
Yeah, and speaking of the comment section or the description, underneath that is a comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, hi, hello, you can
smash that like button.
Smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell so you get notified every time that we drop a new episode. And again, sound off in the comments. Did you see this movie? And I mean, I don't know. What should our question be, Cullen?
What's your gayest trauma?
There you go. What's your gayest trauma? But also like sound off about like, did you get to see this movie? And if you're listening to this and you haven't, go watch it, come back to the comments, and let us know what you think about it. Do you think it counts as a fantasy film?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or should we delete the episode?
Well, at least you've got an excuse, so yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So next week is another.
We know who it's gonna be. We've got it. Yes. We got it on the books. Yeah.
We did.
We're talking about a movie that is definitely fantasy. Debatable how queer it is, but I think it's enough of a queer icon film. We're doing 1998's Mulan, the animated classic. Yeah. First movie I saw in theaters. Yeah, it's like you could argue it's not technically, but it is.
Yeah, no. And we have a fantastic guest who's going to be joining us, a friend and a friend of the pod. I don't think he's been on this podcast yet, so it'll be the first time that our fantasy get to hear him. But yeah, we're so excited to talk about Mulan. Love this movie. I think we referenced it in our Aragon episode. We talked about the Red Dragon that is featured in Mulan. So yeah, definitely be back here next week to have our second episode of Pride Month. So yeah.
And Callum and Michael, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And again, congrats on 50 episodes. What a fab milestone, and really grateful to be here, become part of the fantasy, and yeah, on a milestone episode as well. So thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much. And listeners, we'll see you next week.
We'll see you at the club.
Boom, boom. You can tell I haven't been to a club in a long time.
Hashtag the power of love.
The power of love.